The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. I call him David. He has been watching me. In the last month or so, I have seen horrors beyond my own understanding. Growing up, I have been a massive fan of the horror genre. When I was young, before I could remember everything clearly, my mother would take me and my older sibling to the library to get Goosebumps CDs. I must have been no younger than 3, maybe 4. This is what my mother told me anyways, but that is neither here nor there. This is just to say I was not easy to scare growing up. I still am not easy to scare. I was born in Montana on the 3rd of March 2003, and after I turned 4 or 5, my dad had to get a different job as the housing crisis had begun. He had no college degree or any experience that would be considered worthwhile, so he would take what he could get. That would lead us to move down into Sheridan, Wyoming. Sheridan is just under the Montana border with a couple thousand people living there. We moved here because of the grandparents on my mom's side. They moved here way back, raising both my mom and uncle in this small town. With the help of that family, my dad got a job working as a teller for a bank. Not the most lucrative way of making money, but a way to make money nonetheless. And while this move to bumfuck nowhere did not affect me, my older sister was devastated. I had no school friends. I was just in preschool. My older sister, on the other hand, who had been in elementary school for some time, cried the whole car ride. My younger sister, born 3 years after me, did not even know what was going on. For me, everything was fine for years, despite my family having no money. I had the whole school experience with things such as puppy love, after-school activities, and spending time with friends. On my birthdays or Christmas, after I started to understand the financial situation my parents were in, I tried not asking for expensive toys or gadgets in an attempt to make life easier for my parents and for me to be less disappointed. The 5 of us were happy. Of course, all the other kids my age thought I was crazy. I didn't have a phone. The only console I had was a Wii. The YU had came out. And all the food we ate was great value or something similar to Walmart brand food. I was not popular, but overall I was well liked. And I would continue to embrace this life I built until middle school, 6th to 8th grade in Sheridan. When my first encounter happened, I remember it being winter as snow was everywhere. The house we had in Sheridan was walking distance from the middle school. Back in those days, the neighbor kids, my older sister, and I would walk to and from school every day. It wasn't rare for one of us to stay a little longer to talk to a teacher, or go do something else completely. We were all independent individuals. Hell, one of the neighbor kids only walked to school with us and not once walked back with us. During the winter, the group largely resembled that of the kids from A Christmas Story. During the colder months, minus being chased. One day, I would stay at school a little later than usual, and I had told that group to leave me behind. My English teacher wanted me to finish a project I had. She was worried as I was terrible with doing homework. I don't exactly remember if I finished or not. Probably not. I was a bit airheaded and typically forgot what all happened at school by the time I walked home. By the time I was outside walking home, the sun had begun to set, not too unusual as it gets dark around 5 during the winter months. This meant if you had extracurriculars in this time, you almost always went home as the sun was setting. Something I didn't do often at the time, meaning this was a first to me. It wasn't eerie or anything, just a different time in the same place. The night sky was clear, but the air was freezing. My glasses would fog up as I breathed, trying to contain the heat leaving my mouth by having my coat cover the lower half of my face. The route I took home brought me through Kendrick Park, a lovely place in the spring, summer, and fall, but dull and lifeless in the winter. There is this path that goes up this hill that splits a miniature forest in half. This was before they built an improved path below the parking lot of the school to keep the hill in place. That wooded area always seemed much more vast and full as a kid than they actually were. We'd play in them often, tag and such, for hours, never seeming to reach any ends. Anyways, I was marching down this path, careful not to slip on the ice. There were, or are, lights that lined the path illuminating the snow ahead of me. And, of course, like your typical horror movie, there was a shuffling in the trees. That night was the first night I saw David. That is what I called him. That is what I still call him. David was a tall, nude man that terrified me. I am not sure of his motives, but I'd say he was hunting me at times. It wasn't until I reached the bottom of the hill did I turn around to see him. He had no genitals, thank fuck. But he was just standing there in this cold fucking weather. No clothing, no for, just the mist being expelled through his mouth. I could only stare into his dark eyes, the pupils seeming never-ending. It felt like an eternity, but it couldn't have been more than 5 minutes before I started to run. I ran. I began to sob, afraid to turn around, stumbling every so often as the weight of my backpack made it difficult to keep my balance. I'd make it home that night. I'm not sure if David even chased me, crashing through the front door. My mom came to comfort me quick after hearing me cry. I don't remember much after that. According to my older sister, I blurted out something about a naked tall man whose eyes were not his own. Mom, practically shitting herself, my sister's words, called the cops. But they did not find anyone, or they couldn't find anyone. My mom was afraid, mad, confused. She would tell Dad what I said once he got home, and eventually, even my grandfather caught wind of what happened. The two of them would go out and search with the cops without much success. The man was gone. I would later tell my sister about David. She had the idea of giving him his name to make it easier for me to tell her. I don't know if she believed me at the time. She was born a skeptic like everyone in my family. Her reaction was one of confusion, but after that night, she would always walk closer to me when she could. She probably thought I just saw a man, just like my parents and police. The neighbor kids had took note of the police from the previous night. They would ask my sister and I, neither of us knowing what to say. I wouldn't say anything. My sister would speak for me, lying, saying that I found a lost dog or something, and the police were just picking it up as it ran out the front door. Something like that. They didn't push for more details. I wouldn't see David again for months, maybe over a year. I can't remember. Those details seemed to be faded with time. I had almost completely forgotten about David, but the fear from my first experience followed me even after the memory disappeared. I still remember the heat of the day from the second encounter with David. It was summer. I couldn't tell you the day or the exact time of when I saw him. As when you're a kid without ambition, summer passes you by so quick you lose track of time. I had a friend with me this next time, Justin. He was just like me, a kid with no ambition, little money, and doing whatever he can to entertain himself. The two of us would go around on our cheap bikes, buying snacks which change found in couches, watching TV, playing video games, swimming, and so on, and so on. On this day, we threw ice cream in a blender and made milkshakes with Great Value ice cream. It was a typical summer day for us until Justin got bored of the YouTube video that had auto-played. Justin would look at me and ask, "Did you know we have a basement?" I didn't, and I was intrigued. Justin lived in a house with a family above his home. I just assumed that there might have been a family below us if there was a basement. Justin would then ask, "Do you want to go down there and explore?" Of course. I say of course. We had to go out the back door. The heat was beating down on the two of us. The basement hatch was just to the left of the back door. Justin opened it up, and we both went down, Justin leading me. There was no lights. I suppose the light bulbs that were down here had burnt out years ago, someone leaving them on and never coming back down. It was clear that nobody had been down here in a while. Thankfully, Justin had brought a flashlight with him. There were no doors, only concrete imitating doorways. The cold layout of the basement resembled the home that lay above it, with walls and corners. Other than the rats and lone boxes, the basement was empty. The two of us would scrounge around the loose boxes, careful not to disturb any rats. They were largely filled with garbage. Many of the boxes were filled with old clothes, creepy dolls, and even some jewelry that looked expensive. When we came across anything that looked like treasure, one of us would cram the thing into one of our pockets. Justin found a ball, and we passed it to each other in the dark for a minute before resuming our search. Lots of boring things, old papers we did not want to read, and dusty books were quickly unpacked. The basement now looked like it was robbed. I mean, depending on how you look at it, we did rob it. "What the fuck?" Justin would scream. I would turn around, going to see what Justin was swearing over. David. He was blocking the way out. My blood ran cold. That winter, from several months before, suddenly flooded my thoughts. The cold feeling from that night returning to my face. I now have a better look at this thing. Using the false doorways as a reference, this thing was taller than the typical doors in a house, having to slouch to fit in the damn basement. It had thin hair that was illuminated by the sunlight coming from the only exit, a light that I now so desperately wanted to feel. And its eyes, its fucking eyes. The pupils filled the entire eye, making them pitch black. Neither me nor Justin could be brought to move. A minute or two goes by of silence. Justin would make a slow inhale. "Who the fuck are you? What do you want?" Justin would scream, breaking the silence. The thing fucking smiled, slowly but noticeably. Shit, 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 shit. Without taking my eyes off of the thing, I reach for something, anything within a box near me. I grab an old picture frame and stand up once again. I was ready to throw whatever I grabbed at David. Justin began to breathe faster, beginning to panic. "Leave us alone! Fuck off, you freak!" Justin tossed an entire box, this one filled with the old clothing we did not want. The box would fall short, coming to the thing's feet. David looked at it. Every move David made was slow, painfully slow. David picked up something from the pile that spilled out of the box. The two of us stopped breathing, waiting for him to attack or defend something. But the thing, David, left, slowly, without warning, without noise. The two of us just stood there, unable to move in fear that he was waiting for us. I broke my focus to look at Justin. He looked back. "Hey," I broke the silence, hoping and praying that I didn't just call the creature back to us. "Yeah," Justin responded, voice shaking. "Let's go to my house." The two of us ran up the stairs, slam into the back door, grabbing whatever. We got on our bikes and left. We did not speak, not until we were at my home. We acted as if nothing had happened. Justin would spend the night, and the two of us stayed up late into the next morning. Justin would move to his grandfather's a day later, a nice place just out of town. I'd ask about this later in life. Apparently, something happened to the family above him overnight. His mom was the one who sent him to his grandpa, and she did not tell him why until he was an adult. Justin and I would still hang out. We arguably hung out more now. I'd practically spend the entire weekend over at Justin's grandfather's with Justin, being close enough to town as it isn't a whole ordeal to get a ride, but just far enough out that we could do even more things. All those homes all have large backyards, large enough to do miniature camping trips. Being outside of town meant we could have large fires, fireworks, and so on. Justin would end up getting a BB gun. While we never shot at any animals, we would practice our aim shooting these makeshift targets. The targets we set up were on this dingy shed. We would talk about the basement one day, the weekend before school started. "Do you know what it was?" The question came from Justin. I wanted to play dumb, but immediately knew what he was talking about. "What?" "The thing that trapped us in the basement." Justin paused. "You did not scream, did you? I don't know. See him before?" "Once." "Did he follow you to my house?" "I'm not sure." I shot Justin's BB gun, missing the target entirely. I handed Justin his gun for his turn. "Have you seen him since then?" I asked. "Maybe. It's like I'd see him standing in the corner of the room, but it is just a shirt hanging up." Justin shivered, recalling this memory. "Let's forget about him. David. I tell Justin, that's what I call him. Why David? Why did your mom call you Justin? Justin fired his shot, one ring off from a bullseye. Dunno. I call him David for the same reason your mom calls you Justin. Because, well, that is just how things go. I pause again, lining up my shot. I don't know. I'm just a kid. I shot a bullseye. Not long after this conversation, David would come to see me. Justin was in Minnesota with his grandfather, going on a trip to visit family. It was the first weekend since school started. I wasn't used to the school schedule yet, so I was staying up late watching Adult Swim or whatever was on that late. I ended up falling asleep in my living room. Tap, tap, tap. The couch I was sleeping on was under the window that was facing towards the street. The window has curtains, but I left the curtains up after closing the window. I wasn't thinking. The TV was on the other side of the room. If someone wanted, they could watch whatever Adult Swim show was on along with me. But, alas, our TV had this automatic turn-off system so that after an hour or so it would turn off. It means the poor street folk couldn't watch our TV without me. I was dreaming. I forget about what. It doesn't matter. But there is this tapping I hear in my dream. Well, I know now that the tapping wasn't in a dream. The room was almost silent. Darkness was overwhelming. My eyes were adjusted to the dim-lit room, the only light being from the moon. I didn't move my body. I was tired. I had my eyes half open and taking in the room around me, about to close them when tap, tap, tap. I fully opened my eyes. I hadn't gotten up yet. I shuffled to get up, but that is when I saw David, his reflection in the black screen TV. I frowncy. My gaze was locked onto David's reflection. He was grinning. His smile was unnaturally large tonight. His eyes were fixated on me, looking down on me. I was defenseless, afraid, and unable to move. I watched this reflection for hours, literal hours this time, every 10 or so minutes, counting 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, starting back at 1 again every time he tapped on the glass. About the second hour in, I had to pee. I ended up pissing my pants. The wet stain in my pants was uncomfortable and it stunk. I know Mom and Dad would be pissed about me pissing on the couch, but I couldn't be bothered with that seemingly pointless thought right now. Right now, I needed to not move. Another hour would go by, 18 window taps an hour, I assumed. 3,600 seconds. The dread I felt was stronger than the need to sleep. Another hour would go by. Then another hour of this painful counting, of this tapping routine. And after another 30 minutes, about 6:30, the man frowns. His expression was angry. The anxiety I felt while watching him leave was immeasurable. Once I was confident he was gone, about 5 minutes after he faded from the TV, I ran into my bedroom. I'd throw off my pajamas and underwear, walk into my room and pass out into my bed. My dad was furious about the piss. It was about 2 p.m. when I woke up. I would exit my room with a dirty towel around my waist, and while heading towards the shower, my dad would stop me. Why does my couch smell like pee? I was ready to tell him, but only after I showered. Can I please go shower first? I can explain it when I'm clean. Are you hungover? Are you doing drugs? What drugs are you doing? My dad had a mix of fury and concern. I ignored his questions for now. He allowed me to head into the bathroom, seeing how little I was dressed. I would have to explain it. He wouldn't let go of this if I didn't. The water from the shower head felt amazing. I washed away all the sweat and piss sticking to me. To be in a room with no windows for David to peek into gave me relief. I'd wash everything that day, hair to toes. The water helped wake me up, bringing me out of the drowsy state I was in. I would finish my shower, put clean clothes on, and meet my dad right as I exit the bathroom. I did not know what to tell him. I know I didn't do drugs that day, but what part of the night was believable? An impossibly tall man who had black eyes watched me sleep. I tried to explain what I saw. Thankfully, he half believed me. He believed that there could have been a man at the window last night, but he also had me drug tested. The results came back negative for all drugs they tested for. My parents officially were concerned now. This is the second time, to their knowledge, as I had yet to bring up the basement incident, that I brought up David. This creepy nudist who had a thing for their son. We had no security at the time, nothing to prevent a break-in or any sort of crime from happening. That is when they decided to start taking their jobs more seriously. My mom was hired to be a substitute teacher. It helps pay for small luxury things like on-brand food. My dad eventually got promoted. A lot. Even though he did not have a collage degree, he took personal time to study how banking and loans work. This study eventually got him a job giving loans to people who want to buy houses and cars and such. It was after one of his many promotions Dad went to buy security cameras. That would be the last I saw of David in my teenage years. I couldn't tell you why. Maybe David has an understanding of modern technology. Maybe he got bored of me. But just because I didn't see him doesn't mean he had stopped visiting me. However, it was January, earlier this year. I'd been looking through old photos. I hadn't thought of David since I was 13 all those years ago. I am of legal drinking age now, 10 whole years. As of now, me and my girlfriend were planning on moving in together. I was getting boxes filled with stuff I thought I needed. Looking through my old stuff, I found some old photos from my teen years. Some were Polaroids. Some were printed from one of those Walmart kiosks. It was nostalgic looking at me and Justin back in those years. There was a photo of the day I first met my girlfriend, and another after I had my first drink. Then there was a photo of the mountain trip me, Justin, and some others had. It was Justin's grandpa who took us, and who took the photo. We were 16 at the time. There were 2 other boys, Brandon and Sam. The photo was taken on a Polaroid, but there were 5 figures in the photo. I didn't think much of it until minutes thinking about who all was there. How the fuck did I miss this? The memories of David came back. The snow, the basement, the reflection. There was more photos. Some where David was right fucking next to me. The bastard never left me alone. The photos I had went up until my 21st birthday, and checking my phone I had some photos with him just last Christmas. The Christmas was just last month. My girlfriend came into my room, concerned. What's wrong, baby? Look at this photo. It was the photo from the mountain trip. What's up with it? If Doug, Justin's grandpa, took the photo, and Justin, Sam, and Brandon are in the photo with me, who is that? I point to the figure. She was worried. It was written on her face, but she did not say anything before I started showing her all the other photos. One from my birthday, our anniversary, and even one from my grandpa's funeral, Dad's side. I don't know. Her voice was faint compared to her normal volume. What was she supposed to know? Her boyfriend had gone crazy. I look around my room, pushing things around. I break some things as I, opening the curtains in my room and looking out the window. He was there. His face was almost pressed up to the window, just like last time. I didn't know what to do. My girlfriend shrieked, seeing the man there, quickly scurrying out of the room. She called 911, explaining the situation. My mom heard from the living room and came running in. It all happened so fast. Mom pushed me to the side. Bang, 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 bang. 4 shots rang through the house. My mom had bought a pistol, after the financial situation improved, of course. But she never forgot what I said. The experiences I had at 13. She was ready for this day. David gave an animal-like screech, running away. I got up in time to see him disappear into the night. The cops would question the 3 of us, asking my mom to see the security footage. The footage was corrupted, from minutes before I opened my curtain to right after David left. I spent these last few months afraid, not sure what to do next. I would stay inside for long periods of time. I thought she would leave me, but apparently my girlfriend loves me more than I thought, helping me go through these last months. But I have been inside for too long now. I hate having to be taken care of. I need to get my life back in order. I am going to go around asking about my situation around town, bringing it up to extended family, and so on. I hope David had died to the bullets, but just in case, I'm asking if anyone has had a similar experience. Any advice or clues as to what I am dealing with is appreciated. The gentle sway of the train car had always been soothing to me. As a regional sales manager for a large pharmaceutical company, I spent more time on railways than I did in my own bed. The rhythmic clack of wheels on tracks was my lullaby. The ever-changing landscape outside my window a constant companion. This particular Tuesday evening found me on yet another overnight train. Heading from Chicago to New York for a critical meeting, I settled into my usual routine. Laptop out, spreadsheets open, a cup of mediocre coffee cooling on the fold-down tray. The first sign that something was amiss came about 3 hours into the journey. I glanced at my watch, frowning slightly. We should have reached Cleveland by now, but the cityscape outside remained stubbornly rural. Fields and forests rolled by, bathed in the eerie glow of a full moon. I flagged down a passing attendant, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a pinched expression. "Excuse me," I said, "but shouldn't we have reached Cleveland by now?" She gave me a strange look, her eyes slightly unfocused. "Cleveland? I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not familiar with that stop. Perhaps you're thinking of a different route." Before I could respond, she hurried away, disappearing into the next car. I sat at back, puzzled. How could she not know Cleveland? It was a major stop on this line. I shook my head, chalking it up to a new employee's confusion, and returned to my work. As the hours ticked by, my unease grew. The landscape outside never changed. An endless loop of moonlit fields and shadowy forests. My phone had lost signal long ago, and my watch seemed to be malfunctioning, its hands spinning wildly before stopping altogether. I decided to stretch my legs, hoping a walk through the train might clear my head. As I made my way through the cars, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. The few passengers I saw sat motionless in their seats, staring blankly ahead or out the windows. In the dining car, I found an elderly man hunched over a cup of coffee. His wrinkled hands trembled slightly as he lifted the mug to his lips. "Excuse me," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I don't mean to bother you, but have you noticed anything strange about this journey?" The old man's rheumy eyes focused on me, a flicker of recognition passing across his face. "You're new, aren't you?" he said, his voice a dry whisper. "First time on this line?" I nodded, a chill running down my spine. "What do you mean?" "This line. This is just the regular Chicago to New York route, isn't it?" He let out a wheezing laugh that turned into a cough. "Oh, my boy," he said, shaking his head. "This ain't no regular route. This here's the last line. Ain't no New York where we're headed." "I don't understand," I said, my heart beginning to race. "Where are we going then?" The old man leaned in close, the smell of stale coffee on his breath. "Nowhere," he whispered. "Everywhere. This train don't stop, son. It just keeps on going. Round and round. World without end." I jerked back, convinced I was dealing with a madman. "That's impossible," I said. "Every train has to stop eventually." He just smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "You go on believing that if it makes you feel better. But mark my words, you'll see. We all figure it out sooner or later." I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my chair. "You're crazy," I muttered, backing away. "This is just a normal train. We'll be in New York by morning." As I turned to leave, the old man called out, "What's your name, son?" I hesitated for a moment before answering. Jack Thurston." He nodded slowly. "Well, Jack Thurston. I'm Howard. I'll be seeing you around. We've got all the time in the world, after all." I hurried back to my seat, Howard's words echoing in my mind. It was nonsense. Of course, trains didn't just go on forever. There had to be a rational explanation for the delays and the strange behavior of the staff. As I sank into my seat, I noticed a young woman across the aisle, furiously scribbling in a notebook. Her long dark hair fell in a curtain around her face, and her leg bounced with nervous energy. "Excuse me," I said, leaning towards her. "I don't suppose you know when we're due to arrive in New York, do you?" She looked up, her eyes wide and slightly manic. "New York," she repeated, letting out a hysterical giggle. "Oh, honey, there is no New York, not anymore." There's only the train. I felt my blood run cold. What are you talking about? She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. I've been on this train for, I don't know how long. Days, weeks. It all blurs together. But I figured it out. We're not going anywhere. We're stuck in a loop. A never-ending journey to nowhere. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. That's impossible. You're just confused. Maybe you fell asleep and missed your stop. She laughed again, a sound devoid of humor. Oh, I wish it were that simple. But look around you. Have you seen anyone get off? Have we stopped at any stations? This isn't a normal train. Jack, this is something else entirely. I started at the sound of my name. How do you know my name? She smiled, a sad, knowing expression. I heard you talking to old Howard in the dining car. I'm Lisa. By the way, welcome aboard the Eternal Express. I stood up abruptly, my head spinning. This is insane. All of you are insane. I'm going to find the conductor and get some answers. As I stormed off towards the front of the train, I heard Lisa call out behind me. Good luck with that, but don't say I didn't warn you. I made my way through car after car, each one identical to the last. The same faded blue seats, the same flickering overhead lights, the same blank-faced passengers staring into nothingness. How long had I been walking? It felt like hours, but that was impossible in a train of normal length. Finally, I reached what should have been the engine car, but instead of a locomotive, I found myself in another passenger car, exactly like all the others. I spun around, disoriented. How could this be? A hand on my shoulder made me jump. I turned to find the attendant from earlier, her pinched face now twisted into an unnaturally wide smile. Can I help you, sir? She asked, her voice sickly sweet. I need to speak to the conductor, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. There's been some kind of mistake. This train should have reached New York by now. Her smile never wavered. I'm sorry, sir, but there is no conductor, and there is no mistake. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. I backed away from her, my heart pounding. What is this place? What's happening? She tilted her head, her eyes suddenly black and empty. This is the last line, Mr. Thurston. The train that never stops, never ends. You bought a ticket, and now you're on the ride of eternity. I turned and ran, pushing past confused passengers, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a dream, a hallucination, anything but reality. I burst into the space between cars, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. The door to the next car was just a few feet away. If I could just reach it, maybe I could find a way off this nightmare train. But as I stepped forward, the gap between the cars seemed to stretch. The next door moved further and further away. No matter how fast I ran, the wind howled around me, drowning out my screams of frustration and fear. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back into the car. I fell to the floor, gasping for breath. Lisa stood over me, her face pale in the flickering light. Are you crazy? She hissed. You can't go out there. Between the cars, that's where it gets you. Where what gets you? I asked, my voice shaking. She helped me to my feet, glancing nervously at the door. The thing that runs this train, the thing that brought us all here. Trust me, you don't want to meet it. As if on cue, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the car. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Part machine, part animal, all wrong. The lights flickered more intensely, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw something massive moving in the shadows between the cars. Lisa pulled me back to our seats, her grip on my arm almost painful. Listen to me, she said urgently. I know this is hard to accept. God knows, I fought against it for, I don't even know how long, but fighting only makes it worse. You have to accept where you are, or you'll go mad. I slumped in my seat, my mind reeling. But why? Why is this happening? What is this place? She shook her head. I don't know. None of us do. All we know is that we're here, on this never-ending journey. Some think it's hell, others purgatory. Old Howard thinks it's some kind of cosmic mistake. Me, I think it's just the universe's way of saying tough luck, kiddo. I looked out the window, watching the same moonlit landscape roll by. How many times had I seen those same fields, those same trees? How long would I continue to see them? So what do we do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lisa gave me a sad smile. We ride, we talk, we try to stay sane, and we hope that maybe, just maybe, one day we'll reach the last stop. As the train rolled on into the endless night, I realized with a sinking heart that my journey had only just begun. And the destination, that remained a terrifying mystery. Days blended into nights, and nights into days. The monotonous rhythm of the train became the backdrop to my existence. I lost count of how many times I'd watched the same scenery roll by, how many times I'd walked the length of the train, hoping to find something, anything different. Lisa became my anchor in this sea of madness. We spent hours talking, sharing stories of our lives before the train. She had been a journalist, always chasing the next big story. Guess I found it, she would say with a bitter laugh, gesturing at our surroundings. Old Howard joined us often, his weathered face a map of the time he'd spent on this hellish journey. Been riding this rail for longer than I can remember, he'd say, his rheumy eyes distant. Seen folks come and go, some just disappear, others he'd trail off, shaking his head. I learned to fear the spaces between the cars, sometimes late at night. When the train's rhythm seemed to falter, we'd hear things, scraping, slithering sounds. Once, I caught a glimpse of something massive and dark undulating past the windows. Lisa pulled me away before I could get a better look. "Trust me," she said, her face pale. "You don't want to know." The other passengers were a mix of the resigned and the mad. Some, like us, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Others had given in to despair, sitting in the same spots day after day, staring blankly at nothing. And then there were those who'd lost their minds entirely, prowling the cars with wild eyes and incoherent ramblings. One such soul was a man we called the Preacher, tall and menacing, with a tangled beard and eyes that burned with fanatical fervor. He would roam the train, shouting about sin and redemption. "We're all here for a reason," he'd bellow, spittle flying from his lips. "This is our punishment, our penance. Repent, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find your way off this damn train." Most ignored him, but some listened. I watched as he gathered a small following, passengers desperate for any explanation, any hope of escape. It was on what I guessed to be my 100th day on the train that things took a darker turn. I was jolted awake by screams coming from the front of the car. Lisa was already on her feet, her face a mask of terror. "They've done it," she whispered. "They've actually done it." I followed her gaze to see a group of the Preacher's followers dragging a struggling passenger towards the door between cars. The Preacher stood by, his arms raised, chanting something I couldn't make out over the victim's screams. "What are they doing?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "A sacrifice," Old Howard said, his voice grim. "Fools think they can appease whatever's running this train, buy their way off with blood." I started to move towards them, but Lisa held me back. "Don't," she hissed. "There's nothing we can do. Just don't watch." But I couldn't look away. The group reached the door, and with a final, triumphant cry from the Preacher, they shoved their victim out into the space between cars. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came a sound, a wet, tearing noise that would haunt my nightmares for days to come. The door slammed shut, cutting off the screams. The Preacher turned to face the rest of us, his eyes wild with excitement. "It is done," he shouted. "The unworthy has been cast out. Soon, we shall reach our final destination." But the train rolled on, unchanged. Hours passed, then days. No final stop, no salvation, just the endless journey and the growing madness of the Preacher and his flock. More sacrifices followed. The train's population dwindled as passenger after passenger was thrown to whatever lurked between the cars. Those of us who refused to join the Preacher's cult banded together, watching each other's backs, sleeping in shifts, It was during one of my watch shifts that I first saw her, a little girl, no more than 7 or 8, wandering alone through the car. Her pink dress was pristine, her blonde hair neatly braided. She looked so out of place in this nightmare that for a moment I thought I was hallucinating. "Yo." "Hello," I said softly, not wanting to scare her. "Are you lost?" She turned to me, and I had to stifle a gasp. Her eyes were completely black, like empty voids in her small face. When she spoke, her voice was old, ancient even. "Lost," she repeated, tilting her head. "No, I don't think so. I know exactly where I am. Do you?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you?" I whispered. She smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp. "I'm a passenger, just like you. We're all passengers here. Jack, all of us, riding the rails to eternity." "How do you know my name?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "I know everyone's name," she said, her black eyes boring into mine. "I know why they're here. I know their sins, their fears, their deepest, darkest secrets." She took a step closer. "Would you like to know yours?" "Jack." I backed away, my heart pounding. "Stay away from me," I said, my voice shaking. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Jack, you can't run from me. You can't run from any of this. You bought your ticket. Now you have to ride." I blinked, and she was gone, just vanished, as if she'd never been there at all. I slumped in my seat, my mind reeling. Was I losing it? Had I finally snapped, like so many others on this godforsaken train? I must have dounced off, because the next thing I knew, Lisa was shaking me awake. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Jack," she said urgently, "something's happening. The train, it's slowing down." I sat Saturday up, suddenly alert. She was right. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could feel the train decelerating. The familiar clack of wheels on tracks was slowing, becoming more distinct. Passengers were stirring, looking around in confusion and hope. Even the preacher and his followers had stopped their mad ranting, staring out the windows with a mix of fear and anticipation. "Are we stopping?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. Old Howard shook his head, his expression grim. "Don't get your hopes up, son. In all my time here, I've never known this train to stop. Whatever's happening, it ain't gonna be good." As if to punctuate his words, the lights in the car began to flicker more intensely than ever before. The temperature dropped rapidly, our breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. And then, with a great screeching of metal on metal, the train ground to a halt. For a moment, there was absolute silence. We all held our breath, waiting, hoping, fearing. Then, with a hiss of hydraulics, the doors slid open. Finally, the preacher cried, pushing his way towards the exit. "Our salvation is at hand. Come, brothers and sisters, let us..." His words were cut off by a scream of pure terror. As he stepped off the train, something grabbed him, something huge and dark and impossible. In the blink of an eye, he was gone, leaving nothing behind but a spreading pool of blood on the platform. Chaos erupted. Passengers pushed and shoved, some trying to get off the train, others desperately attempting to close the doors. I lost sight of Lisa in the pandemonium, and through it all, I heard laughter, that same glass-like sound from before. I turned to see the little girl with the black eyes, standing calmly in the middle of the mayhem. "Welcome to the last stop, Jack," she said, her voice cutting through the screams and cries. "Are you ready to get off?" As I stared into those bottomless black eyes, I realized with dawning horror that our endless journey had only been the beginning. The real nightmare was just starting. And somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of a train whistle, signaling the departure to our next unknown destination. The chaos around me faded into a dull roar as I stared into the little girl's black eyes. Time seemed to slow, and in that moment, I had a sudden, crystal-clear realization. This was a test. The endless train ride, the maddening repetition, the horrors we'd witnessed, it had all been leading to this moment of choice. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm not getting off. Not here. Not like this." The girl's smile faltered for a split second, a crack in her otherworldly composure. "You don't have a choice, Jack. Everyone has to get off eventually." I stood my ground, even as I heard more screams from the platform, more passengers being dragged into the darkness. There's always a choice. "You told me I bought a ticket for this ride. Well, I'm not ready for it to end." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't stay on the train forever, Jack. It doesn't work like that." "Watch me," I growled, turning away from her and pushing through the panicked crowd. I had to find Lisa and Howard. We'd survived this long together. I wasn't about to leave them behind now. I spotted Howard first, huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with terror. "Come on," I said, grabbing his arm. "We need to move." "Where?" he asked, his voice trembling. "There's nowhere to go. It's got us. It's finally got us." I shook him, perhaps more roughly than I intended. "Listen to me. This isn't the end. It's just another part of the journey. But we have to stick together. Now help me find Lisa." Something in my voice must have reached him because he nodded, stumbling to his feet. We pushed through the crowd, searching desperately for Lisa's familiar face. We found her near the front of the car, trying to pull other passengers back from the door. "Lisa," I called out, "we have to go." She turned, relief flooding her face when she saw us. "Go where?" she asked as she reached us. "In case you haven't noticed, we're a little short on options here." I pointed towards the back of the train. "We keep going. This thing has to end somewhere, and I don't think it's here." As if in response to my words, I heard the train whistle again, louder this time. The engine was starting up. "It's leaving," Howard said, his eyes wide. "We have to get off now, or we'll be trapped forever." I finished for him. "I've got news for you, Howard. We're already trapped. Have been since we first stepped on board. But now we have a chance to find the real way out." Lisa looked at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You think this is all part of it, don't you? The final test?" I nodded. "It has to be, and I'm not failing it by giving in now." The train lurched, beginning to move. Around us, the last of the passengers were either fleeing onto the platform or collapsing in despair. "It's now or never," I said. "Are you with me?" Lisa grabbed my hand without hesitation. Howard hesitated for a moment, looking longingly at the door, but then took Lisa's other hand. "All right," he said. "Let's see where this crazy train takes us." As the train picked up speed, we made our way towards the back, pushing against the tide of terrified passengers. The little girl appeared again, her face contorted with rage. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "You have to get off. Everyone gets off." "Not today," I told her, pushing past. We reached the final car just as the platform disappeared from view. Through the windows, we could see only darkness. Not the familiar darkness of night, but an absolute void, empty of all light and substance. The train picked up speed, rattling and shaking more violently than ever before. We huddled together, bracing ourselves against the walls of the car. "What now?" Lisa yelled over the noise. "We wait," I said, "and we don't let go." The darkness outside seemed to press in on us, seeping through the windows like a living thing. The lights in the car flickered and died, plunging us into blackness. I could feel Lisa's hand in mine, Howard's presence at my side, but I couldn't see them. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. The oppressive darkness lifted, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the train began to slow. Sunlight, real, warm, beautiful sunlight, streamed through the windows. I blinked, my eyes unused to the brightness after so long in the train's artificial light. As my vision cleared, I saw that we were pulling into a station, a real station, with people waiting on the platform, going about their daily lives as if nothing was amiss. The train came to a gentle stop, and the doors opened with a familiar hiss. For a long moment, None of us moved, afraid that this was just another trick, another test. Then Howard let out a whoop of joy and rushed for the door. Lisa and I followed, stepping out onto the platform on shaky legs. The station sign read Grand Central Terminal. We were in New York. We had made it. As we stood there, breathless and disbelieving, I felt a tug on my sleeve. I turned to see the little girl with the black eyes, but now, in the sunlight, she looked different, normal. Just a regular kid with brown eyes and a confused expression. "Excuse me," she said, her voice high and childish. "Is this the train to Chicago?" I knelt down to her level, smiling gently. "No, sweetheart, this train just came from Chicago. But trust me, you don't want to get on it." She nodded, thanked me, and ran off to find her parents. I watched her go, a weight lifting from my chest. Lisa squeezed my hand. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at her, then at Howard, then at the bustling station around us. "Yeah," I said, finally allowing myself to believe it. "I think it is." As we made our way out of the station and into the bright New York morning, I knew that the memories of our endless journey would stay with us forever. But we had faced the darkness, made our choice, and found our way back to the light. And if I ever saw a train again, it would be too soon. I want to tell you about a friend of mine. His name is Isaac. I met him back in college when we were roommates. He was completely obsessed with religion and was a theology major, yet he described himself as a spiritual agnostic. I guess he's what one might call a seeker. One of those folks who tries to learn everything they can about spirituality in hopes of understanding it. The nightstand by his bed had a leaning tower of books, and over time the stack only grew higher and higher. His studies turned him into somewhat of a walking encyclopedia. Isaac was always spouting off nerdy history facts and sacred scriptures. Anything from the iconography of Hindu deities, the history of the Christian churches, to what medieval peasants used in attempts to ward off vampires. Isaac could quote long memorized passages of various texts, including the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita, without consulting them. He knew a lot about the history of religion and could explain complex theological notions in simple terms. In addition to being an endless source of information, he was a man filled with questions. We had many deep conversations into the night hours. His erratic sleeping schedule even began to affect mine and caused me to be late for class on occasion. There was about a month where he thought Buddhism was the one and only true path. Some days, he'd be sure that he had found the answer. The next day, he'd be stuck in the middle again and lost. He would sometimes quote the paranormal author, Charles Fort, who said, "I conceive of nothing." In religion, science, or philosophy, that is more than the proper thing to wear. For a while, I enjoyed Isaac's company and our talks, so much so that rumors got started about us being in a relationship together. But these weren't true, of course. I sympathized with his plight and his journey of self-discovery. It's a process that a lot of folks go through, especially around this time in their lives. When college ended, we went our separate ways, but we decided to stay in touch. Good friends are something that is hard to come by in this world, and so Isaac and I vowed to still meet up on occasion. In the meantime, I managed to find myself a job, gained new friends, and my life continued. I met up with Isaac one day at his new place. He had moved to a pretty obscure rural location out in the sticks. His home was by an old hiking trail that wasn't even on most modern maps of the area. Parts of it were rough and even overgrown. His cabin stood solemn in a world of isolation. I walked in to see hordes of books on theology lining the walls, with shelves beginning to buckle under the weight. He had commentaries on the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of the Damned by Charles Fort, Words of the Buddha, the Book of Mormon, as well as various texts of mantras and meditations. His long list of books included even some UFO and flying saucer literature. It was good to see him again, but our conversation didn't last long. He seemed to be in something of a hurry, and his speech was noticeably faster than usual. He paced around the room as he told me of the things he had been reading, giving me short summaries of his most recent reads. If I tried to change the subject to something else, he brought it right back to the topic of religion. He had the uncanny ability to steer any conversation to his current form of obsession. I'd seen him get this way before. It usually only lasted a week or two before he'd mellow out again. He told me that he planned to get a job as a lecturer soon. It sounded like something he might be good at. Though he did have problems sticking to a schedule, I told him about my new job, my recent vacation, and some adventures I'd been on with my friends since college. While he respectfully tried to be interested, I could tell his racing thoughts were elsewhere. It wasn't long before he was right back to rattling off all the information he'd absorbed. He apologized and told me that he had to get back to his studies before cutting the conversation short. I told him that we could meet up again in about a month or so if he wanted, and he agreed. As I made my exit, I glanced over to see a book titled Flying Saucers, Serious Business, and tried not to smile. It seemed that in his spiritual quest, the net just grew wider and wider. Nothing could have prepared me for what I'd discover on my next visit. I walked through the door to see all of his bookshelves were gone. After welcoming me in, Isaac sat down quietly at his desk. The room was entirely bare. No clutter and no paper. Everything was gone. There was nothing but his bed, his desk, and a lone ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. "Isaac," I said with hesitation, "what happened?" "I got rid of everything. I didn't need it anymore." Isaac wore a peaceful expression on his face and was unaffected by concern or alarm. "Why?" I asked in disbelief. "Because I have the answer now. I'm no longer an agnostic." Isaac was strangely reserved and closed off. He had cooled down considerably from the almost manic demeanor he had upon my previous visit. When I asked what answers he was talking about, he said he couldn't tell me. It wasn't like Isaac to be so tight-lipped about his studies. I'd never seen him behave like this. It was like night and day. He dodged all my questions and told me not to worry about it. Isaac said he no longer had a need for material possessions. "I met a new friend," he said. I was very surprised to hear this. Isaac had always been a bit of a loner. In all the time I'd known him, he had no friends other than me. "Did this friend of yours give you these answers?" "I can't tell you anything about them yet." "Them? Is it more than one new friend?" "No, it's just one," Isaac said, suddenly seeming nervous. He quickly changed the subject and didn't return to this topic for the rest of my visit. I couldn't get any more information out of him no matter how hard I tried. Being the eccentric that he was, Isaac had never had a cell phone. He always said the government used it to track people. While that is true, not having one is a pretty extreme reaction. He always just told me at the end of our chats when to show up for next time. Our get-togethers were usually every month or two. This time, however, Isaac told me he wanted to see me just a week later. I found this strange, but given his recent behavior, I was certainly willing to check up on him. After leaving Isaac's place, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I wondered if he had finally lost his mind. Call it jealousy, but I was a tad suspicious of his new friend and what influence they might have on him. That week was the slowest week of my life. I couldn't help but ruminate on my friend and what he might be going through. Finally, I was able to see him again. He opened the door with a rather serious expression. The first words he said to me were, "They said I could tell you now." He invited me in and told me his story. He was apparently out on the hiking trail one morning after a particularly deep theology study night. Near a specific rocky overhang, he kneeled on the ground and began to call out or pray to the divine to provide him with answers for his many questions. According to Isaac, he was then contacted by something. "I don't know what I was praying to, just the universe or anything that would listen," said Isaac. This wasn't the first time Isaac had tried to interact with the divine by praying, but something different happened this time. The wind picked up around him, and he felt a strange, almost apocalyptic feeling. Before him, a glowing humanoid being appeared. It was in the vague shape of a human outline, but it shined with an incredibly brilliant light that somehow did not hurt his eyes to look at. It was an angel. "I know it was," Isaac said. "They had no name and no gender. They weren't he or she, but they. They spoke to me telepathically with imagery in my mind." Isaac said that this being taught him things. They put images in his mind's eye. He saw people around a stream with a village being set up, then a river and cities being built. He saw how civilizations had formed and grown. Then he saw the human body broken down on a cellular level and the patterns or pathways by which the neurons fire in the human brain. This being seemed to demonstrate that it deeply understood humanity, how it came to be, and what it is now. He was instructed not to tell anyone what he experienced yet. After their telepathic conversation, the being vanished completely. Hearing all this, I was utterly dumbfounded. "Are you sure about this, Isaac?" I asked him. "Absolutely," he replied with sincerity in his voice. Isaac informed me that the being had talked with him again recently and told him that he could tell me what happened. Isaac didn't seem to care whether I believed him or not. It wasn't like Isaac to lie, and the changes in his life seemed undeniable. I felt something had really happened to him, but I wasn't sure what. Isaac was intelligent, but could be a bit naive. I was really worried for him, and even considered calling a psychiatrist or getting him to seek some kind of psychological help. I voiced these concerns to him, but it didn't seem to do any good. He wouldn't hear any of it. He told me once again that he wanted me to return for a visit sooner rather than later. He picked a date only a few days away for us to talk again. In the interim, I thought hard about Isaac and his situation. It was disturbing to think what my friend who I cared about could be experiencing. I spent a lot of time looking for help and trying to figure out what to do. I was frightened for him and felt he might be in danger. I'd long suspected Isaac had some sort of mental issues because of his fixations and odd behaviors, but I had never expected that it might manifest as something like this. He didn't seem to be a threat to himself or others, so I wasn't sure what could be done. I also thought that perhaps this friend of his was a real person who had somehow fooled him into thinking they were some kind of angelic being. Still, in the back of my mind, I wondered if he could be right, and if he actually did encounter something truly unexplainable. On the day of our meeting, I drove up to Isaac's property. Before I could knock on his door, I noticed a piece of lined notebook paper taped to it. The note read the following: "We'll have to postpone your visit. I've gone to meet up with my friend at the trail. Goodbye for now, Isaac." In a panic, I made my way out to the mountainous hiking trail. I had to get to Isaac before he did something stupid. As I journeyed down the wooded path, I began to sense a strange energy in the environment, a feeling of electricity almost. I came upon a bend in the trail. Just beyond was the rock overhang where Isaac said he met the glowing being. As I approached, I could smell the peculiar scent of ounceone carried by the fresh mountain air, as if just after a lightning storm. Suddenly I noticed something moving in the sky towards the area I was walking. Looking upwards, I witnessed a bizarre glowing light flying overhead. I had no clue what it was. I stared, mystified for a moment, before returning to the task at hand. I trekked onward around the trail bend to see Isaac standing there beneath the rock overhang. In front of him, I saw a being made entirely of light in the form of a human silhouette. I was in utter shock. The being emitted no sound, but appeared to be somehow conversing with Isaac, who stood motionless. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I pulled out my cell phone, but as I lifted it to record this bizarre scene, the screen inexplicably blanked out. Smoke began to emit from my phone. Suddenly it became burning hot to the touch. It was like putting your hand on an active stove. With a yelp of pain, I dropped it and watched as the phone went cascading down the mountainside. When I looked back up, I then saw the object again in the sky. It got closer and brighter until I could see it in full view. It was a shining silver flying saucer. A strange sense of paralysis took over me, and I somehow lost the ability to move. The craft slowly descended in a falling leaf pattern as it made its way to the earth. Landing gear extended from the craft and pierced the ground as it came to a final rest. A large metal door on the ship swung open as a silver ramp lowered down. From inside the ship, I could see nothing but a glow of white. I was amazed and terrified, but frozen completely motionless. I stood in silent anticipation with my heart racing. I stared transfixed as the glowing figure guided Isaac up the metal ramp and into the open mouth of the ship. The strange smell of sulfur emanated from the saucer. Isaac dutifully walked behind them, and stepped aboard the craft. I couldn't help but feel as if I was watching some kind of suicide. Isaac had finally taken his leap of faith. The door slammed shut with a metallic sound. The flying saucer then retracted its landing gear and took off straight upwards into the sky before disappearing completely out of view. With this, I was broken from the spell of my paralysis. I stood there for a moment and simply basked in the sheer terror and majesty of it all, before turning around and running all the way back to my car. I haven't spoken to my friend Isaac in months. I have no idea where he is, but that's okay. I have a new friend now who I've been communicating with. This friend has taught me so much, and at long last, they are going to meet with me. They said I was allowed to tell you this story now because so much more is in store for us. I have to go for a hike now. I shouldn't keep them waiting. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.